Hi everybody, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm doing a video called What to Ask Your Astrologer. I'm taking this question that came from one of you in my Q&A folder, and hopefully you'll all find it very useful. I think it's a really good question that came in, which is just generally speaking, if I'm wanting a reading, if I'm ready to get a reading from an astrologer, what types of questions should I ask the astrologer, or is there any general advice for approaching a reading? What are the good reasons to have a reading? Things like that. So this should be applicable for any astrologer that you see, although I don't want to speak on behalf of all astrologers. So, some astrologers may answer this sort of differently. Before I dive into that, I want to remind you that I'm fundraising until the end of the year. There's still some time left to pitch in if you haven't yet and support my work in 2020. When you do so, you can pick up a reward reading. You can pick up discounted tuition to all of my 2020 online classes and certification programs. That deal of 50% off all of my online courses is only good until December 31st at midnight. So take advantage of that while it's still there. I'd love to see some of you in class. It's my best savings of the year. I did some videos if you want to learn more about the classes I offer. You can also visit my website, nightlightastrology.com, or email me at nightlightastrology@gmail.com if you have any questions. So thank you all so much for your support. We're going to try to get to 500 backers. That is our stretch goal this year. We topped last year's record of 419. And now we're somewhere in 440 range. So if we can push over 500 backers, that will be a stretch goal for this year and set the bar really high for next year as well. So thank you everyone so much. Sharing, liking, subscribing to my channel helps it grow. So I appreciate all the different ways in which people support me. All right, so this question came from Nick, and it was, what do you think are the top 3 questions somebody should be asking an astrologer? For example, let's say somebody is new to astrology and knows nothing about it. Are there some general questions one might want to ask? Or do you ever look at a client chart and say to yourself, why is this person asking this question? They really should be asking me this other question. I guess I personally don't have any specific questions about my own chart, but only want to know myself better through astrology. So I guess when one wants to know themselves better, how do you go about doing such a reading? I hope you don't mind trying to answer my question. Hopefully I'm making sense. You make great sense, Nick. Thank you for your question. And I chose this question because it's a question I actually get at least 3, 4, 5 times a year, and I've never done a video on it, so I thought this would be a good one. First of all, generally speaking, there are 2 types of readings that astrologers are doing, and these 2 types of readings can be described as universal or topical. Universal means, what is this person's life like as a whole? In this type of reading, we're typically looking at universal signifiers in the birth chart, like the sun, the moon, the rising sign. In Hellenistic astrology, were they born at day, during the daytime or nighttime? Which planets are in sect and out of sect? Which planets are angular? And we're crafting something like the narrative arc of your lifetime, the plot line of the movie, the plot line of the play on the stage of your life. So that's called a universal. Those are universal significators, and that is kind of a basic reading. Really good for people who are having a reading for the very first time because it covers a lot of broad, general areas of life. What kinds of things you'll be compelled to do? What's your maybe psychology or personality like? What are some of the inborn circumstances or fated events of life that will be really strong in a general way? A lot of people come in for readings like that. The second kind of reading is called topical. And it really, what it boils down to is people coming to an astrologer with specific questions about specific topics. I want to understand my karma with regard to money or marriage or my family or my mother or my parents' health or my siblings, my job, pregnancy, etc. So topical readings will usually consist of a series of questions. It's hard to do one, like say an hour reading. It's hard to do a full hour on just one question. Usually won't take that long. But several questions, people will come in, typically people who have follow-ups with me after having an initial birth chart reading, for example, and many astrologers are like this, will ask very specific questions. And so there's general questions and there's specific questions. Both are totally valid to bring into an astrology reading. The problem is this: when people come into a reading, this is my least favorite type of situation. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's my least favorite of all reading situations. Someone comes in for a reading and they say, I don't want to tell you absolutely anything about me, absolutely anything that's going on. I don't have any questions. I just want you to read the chart and tell me what you see. So while one might understand why someone would come in with a request like this, they'd want the astrologer, they don't want the astrologer's reading to be tainted in a sense, maybe by their own input, their own bias, etc. They want to be totally open to what the astrologer sees. Not a bad idea in some ways, but here's why it's not ideal. The main reason that it's not ideal is that let's go back to like ancient times and the role that divination played in the life of an individual. So typically when you would go to an oracle, the oracle at Delphi, or any kind of temple where there are diviners who may take questions and then sleep in the temple and receive a dream that's meant to speak to the question. The important piece that establishes the relevance of the reading, which is like a lightning rod for the spirit, the oracle to speak, is an inquiry, a specific question. So that specific question creates the context that's necessary for petitioning the gods, for petitioning divinity, and for the reader to establish a legitimate connection. It's like, if I don't have to call the gods, I'm not going to. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I don't have to pick up that phone and dial, I'm not going to. This is the attitude that diviners cultivate over time, which is that I don't use the oracle frivolously. I don't consult it unless it's necessary. I don't consult it unless there's a reason for doing so. Now, I'm not saying that in all cases, someone approaching an astrologer and saying, you just show me what you see, doesn't have a purpose. But sometimes it can go in that direction, right? Where the basic issue is, I just want to see something. I just show me what you got. Just give me whatever. And in that sense, if the reading is coming from idle curiosity, or if the reading is coming from like wanting to test the oracle, or if the reading is coming from a space of like just kind of tinkering, right? It's not good. The channel gets staticky when that approach is used typically. Whereas if a person comes in and says, I really want to understand this particular pattern in my life, or this particular theme related to, say, marriage or money or health or something like that, it's instantly a lot easier if there is an authentic, sincere inquiry that the person approaches the astrologer with. It's not the same as an intention, like, oh, I intend something. It's an inquiry. It's a question. So, and then that question can be open-ended. It can be one in which we're seeking deeper understanding of some particular area of our life, or it can be more targeted to, say, the dates or times. Say, I'm curious to know what's coming in the year ahead, or what's coming in the next 6 months, in particular in these areas. But having some kind of specific parameters, some essential need that we're approaching the oracle with, is generally healthier than not having anything. Now, Nick's question, though, was, when one wants to know themselves better, how do you go about doing such a reading? In which case, someone may not have a specific question. So the approach that I would recommend there is just to essentially to think about what getting to know yourself means first. So if you think about what it means to get to know yourself, are you wondering about your behavior? Are you wondering about getting to know yourself in love, getting to know your sense of professional purpose? You have to think a little bit more about what how would you accomplish that by seeing astrology? What are you hoping that an astrologer can tell you more about? Because getting to know yourself is kind of it's a deep philosophical question as to what getting to know yourself means, and then secondarily, how can astrology help a person with that? And so the more that you can shape a sense of why you're approaching the reading, even if it is more general, the better. So topical and universal reasons. There's a few other things that astrologers are really good at doing. One is not just looking into your future, but looking into your past. Astrologers can help you understand the karma that you're born with. And a good question to ask an astrologer is also, what times in my past, what specific seasons of my life in the past do you see as particularly powerful? Because sometimes just having an astrologer say, yeah, between 1987, in the spring and the fall of 1987, you were going through this transit. Seems like these themes were sort of active. What was happening for you at that time? And then you're able to reflect back on what was happening during that particular time. It's surprising how some elements of our life story, it's as though we've neglected them or we haven't really drawn the deeper messages or lessons from them. So the benefit of astrology is not always just in looking at the future, but sometimes in trying to understand and relate to times in the past, which sometimes we just float right on by without really deeply learning something from. So asking astrologers questions about the past, generally or specifically, this specific time in my life in the past, I went through this or this event. Could you tell me what was going on? What kinds of lessons or archetypal themes were present during that time in my life? Huge, super important, beautiful way to access astrology and to understand yourself better. Similarly, looking at the future, you can say, you know, what types of lessons or themes will be present, this spring or this summer or whatever. So looking in the past, looking in the future, having some specific questions about different areas of your life. If you're coming in just being like, just show me what you've got, at least giving some background for the astrologer, like, well, why are you curious? Why do you want to know? Where are you at in your life right now that leads you to ask? And again, the more that it's like idle speculation, really the more fuzzy the reading becomes, and often the less helpful it is. So another thing that really helps is that astrology is primarily meant to help people put their minds at ease. So one thing that we know from ancient astrology is there were two motions in the sky. There was the primary motion of the sky and the secondary motion of the sky. The primary motion of the sky carries everything round and round, the stars, the planets, as the Earth is rotating on its axis from east to above to setting, round and round. That primary motion is related to the motion of the soul. And the soul's need to be, it really, the motion signifies the motion of life itself, and the fact that as a being, as each of us are beings, that we're always doing something. You can't not do something, because to be alive is to be in motion. The secondary motion refers to the planets in the sky, which move against the grain from the west toward the east. They move in the opposite direction through the zodiac out in space, through the stars, through the ecliptic. And their motions represent all of the material energies that we are involved with here in the material world. And so, generally speaking, the extent to which we are invested in and anxious about outcomes in the material world is the degree to which the motion of our soul is identified with the motions of the planets, who are the administrators of karma and the ever-turning wheel of fortune. Astrology is there to help us see the turnings of the wheel of fortune so that the motion of our soul might return to the contemplation of eternal things, namely the archetypes themselves, the planets themselves, which are expressive of the thoughts of the mind of God for the ancient astrologers. So astrology is supposed to help us shift the motion of our soul, meaning our life force, from thoughts, emotional, and psychic investment in lots of dramatic scenarios that are playing out in the material karmic world to the contemplation of higher things. beauty, truth, justice, goodness, harmony, eternity, peacefulness, and so forth. So the best purpose for astrology, an astrology reading, is to ask the astrologer about the areas of life that you are anxious about, coming with the readiness to accept whatever is said, because you're not coming to the astrologer because you're invested in one outcome versus another, but because what you really want is to get that perspective, that objective understanding of the movements of the karmic realm, so that you can start to see them in terms of transcendental. They become transcendental objects of meditation, and the movement of your soul starts ascending toward love, because your reflection upon life is one of transcendental value. You have the paradox of loving all the ups and downs. Astrology is helping us return our way of living to prayerful and meditative with the changes of life. So when you go to an astrologer, the best thing you can do is come in unattached to outcomes or results, but wanting to go into those outcomes and results that you're anxious about, trying to understand them at a deeper level, on the archetypal level, so to be free of their the way that they entangle us in fear and paranoia about the future. Paradoxically, we sometimes tell the future or look at the future in order to do that. It's sort of like saying, look, the dominoes are going to go in a certain direction, and this is the general way in which they're going. Knowing that, you can remember that you're not the dominoes. You might be going along with the dominoes, but you're the one experiencing them as a conscious agent. So it helps us bring back our freedom. To this effect, again, to this extent, again, that we can come to an astrologer to help them look at things that we have anxiety about, that we're having trouble letting go of, and to help get that perspective that helps us detach and reclaim our freedom, our peace, and the love in our heart. That's the best way. But not everyone's there. You may not be able to get to that space necessarily. So there's no harm in just going to an astrologer on some level because you're curious about outcomes in the future, or because you want to know what's coming in the year ahead, just kind of a general weather report. But generally speaking, the more pressure that an astrologer has because they know that someone has a particular outcome they're attached to, the harder it is to do a good reading. The less specific, or less that there is a reason for the meeting, a question being put to the gods, the more static and the harder it is for the reader. So these are general rules. I want to finish by reading you something from Bonatti. This is a medieval astrologer who this is what he wrote. He has this book called 146 Considerations. And the first consideration is this: on those things which move a person to pose a question, there are three motions. First is the motion of the soul, when someone is moved by his intention to pose a question. The second is the motion of the superior bodies, namely when someone asks what they are impressing into the quested thing, what will come of it. The third is the motion of the free will, which can itself be an act of the one asking. Because even though the soul is moved to ask, it does not suffice unless the superior bodies lead him to pose the question, nor does the motion of the stars suffice, unless from the motion of the free will the act of asking is reached. That's the first consideration. The second is equally important. The second consideration is on the way which anyone must observe who wants to ask something of an astrologer. And it is when he himself wishes to ask the astrologer about present things or past things or future things. He must observe this manner of asking, plainly that he ought to pray to the Lord God, with whom every good beginning leads, and to entreat with all devotion and a contrite spirit that it should fall to him to reach to an understanding of the truth of those things about which he intends to ask. Not the outcome we want, but the truth. Then, with this truth, he ought to go to the astrologer with intention concerning that about which he's going to ask, and which he's proposed to ask, in the intention for which he retains in his heart for a day and a night or more, not touched by just any motions of the mind. And thus, he who spoke, who gave so you may seek, will add to it so that you may find. So the idea is basically, come with a sincere question that you know is going to set your heart at rest, that you have a question about your existence, and your goal is peace, not some particular outcome. Your goal is understanding, not some particular outcome. Sit with it, meditate on it, come with a open arms and open heart to receive with something a little bit more specific shape that you've sat with. Don't just impulsively do it. And then that opens up the best portal for divinity to speak. And in the sense, it's like knock and the door will be opened. Astrologers are the hermetic interpreters. We're not the transmitters, we're just the translators. So the astrologer needs this situation, though, ultimately to be able to get a clear message for you on to of which we can translate. That's the basic idea. And this is something that doesn't always happen. It's not perfect. Nobody's expected to be perfect, but we have to try for this standard when we approach an astrologer. Just like you wouldn't go to a temple and where there's an old Zen master sitting there who's very knowledgeable and sit down and be like, all right, I'm just curious, like, you got anything for me? Right? I mean, like, you can kind of imagine how that would be sort of insulting. So the basic idea is it's okay to have general questions, but the more that we can have a specific reason for approaching the oracle, a specific sense of why we're doing it and what we are asking or hoping to understand a little bit more specifically, the easier it is to get something. It's a bit like saying, if you go and ask a very general question to the Sphinx, the answer will be very general. But, doesn't mean it won't be deep. It just means it may be very hard to understand, because if there's kind of a meh, then meh is what has to be addressed by the sky. And the way that we address meh, the sky addresses that, is sometimes very subtle and nuanced and not always easy to read either. So at any rate, that's my suggestion. I hope this helps. You can always book a reading with me on my website through the readings page. There are also, I recommend for people who are studying different forms of astrology, get readings with different astrologers, because, it's a good idea. I think it's personally good to keep working with the same astrologer over time. But in order to do that and find the right fit, you may need to see a variety of different astrologers at first. So it's not a bad idea to kind of shop around a little bit before you find your, whoever is going to play that role in your life. That's my personal advice in terms of, working with an astrologer, and how you get situated with the right one too, is kind of, go shopping a little bit. So, okay, that's what I've got for you guys. Remember, the Kickstarter is still in effect until December 31st. Thank you so much for your donations. If you appreciate this channel, if you like this work, remember to subscribe, like, share, and pitch in if you can at this time of year. It really helps me for the year ahead. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.